Hey there, how's it going? Well, I guess I'd better start with some introductions before we get into this. I'm Dan, but most of my friends like to refer to me as Dan the Camperman. I know, it's not that funny, but it's a well-earned nickname. I just love going camping. I go at least once or twice a month. I mean, when you live in such a bustling city and work in such a crowded office job, sometimes you just need to get away from it all. You know what I mean? Take in some of that fresh country air instead of the daily car fumes and bitterness from other co-workers. Sorry, I'm straying into more personal territory there, aren't I? I've got a question though for anybody that's thinking, where the hell is this idiot going with this? Well, what's the scariest thing you can find when you're alone in the woods? A bear, maybe? Or stumbling upon an angry hornet's nest? Bigfoot? Well, I think I've got an answer to that question. But to get to that, I'm going to have to tell you a little story, so get comfortable. Let's start from the beginning. I finished work on a Friday in the early afternoon, and I decided I wanted to go camp out in a familiar spot for the weekend. A beautiful remote location next to a lake that's surrounded by trees and not that far from a waterfall. Honestly, if you're a sucker for gorgeous locations, then you'd be in heaven here. It's only a 2-hour drive, so I'd have time to set up my tent, get some fishing done in the evening, and make myself a meal. My mind was set, and I told my wife I'd be back by Sunday evening. Silly me, I forgot to mention I have a beautiful wife. Well, if you're listening, hi Liza, I love you. She'll even tell you herself that she loves me going on these camping trips because then she doesn't have to put up with my incessant snoring apparently. Anyways, I gave her a kiss goodbye and filled up the car and set off onto the highway. It's a pretty standard stretch of road for most of the way. Then you gotta make a couple of turns into certain intersections, drive alongside the trees until you hear the roar of the waterfall. That's when you know you're close. And at this point, I guess this was the first time I noticed something odd. When turning into the second to last side road, I remember seeing a group of at least 5 men in a pickup truck passing me slowly. I noticed them and waved at them, giving them a warm smile, but they just blankly stared at me. Even as I turned into a different road, they just kept staring until we were out of view. At this time, I didn't think much of it, as you come across all sorts of people in the world, but it slightly unnerved me a bit. But I got to the location just fine, and I found a decent spot with a view of the waterfall and not too far away from the lake, so I don't have to travel too far away to go fishing. I unpacked the essentials: my tent, my lighter, my flashlight, my hunting knife, and my rifle. It once belonged to my father, until he entrusted it to me just a couple of weeks before he passed away. Cancer. I still miss you, Dad. Every day. Anyway, moving on from all that, I managed to set up my tent quickly and move the rest of my things inside. It's a pretty big tent, could fit at least 3 people inside, but I like my space, so it worked out perfectly for me. With everything in place, I walked down to the bank with my fishing rod, my bait, my lures, and hoping I catch something great. Fishing can be a boring game, but nothing ever beats the feeling of hooking a gigantic fish and cooking it for myself. I cast my line, and I wait for about 20 minutes. In that time, I also did some bird watching while I waited for my dinner to get on the line. I even spotted a deer on the far side of the lake before I even got a nibble. But the one thing you can fall in love with out here is the silence. It's beautiful. But at that moment, the silence was broken by what seemed to be a large snap of branches about 20 meters to my right. I turned my gaze into that direction and began to hear faint rustling in the bushes. It was a fairly large snap, so my mind was racing at what it could be. I instantly thought it was a bear and was having thoughts about rushing back to the tent to grab my gun, but I remained my gaze on the bushes to see if I could make anything out. I'll admit, I was a bit afraid to go over there in case whatever was in there decides to lunge out at me and make me its dinner, so I stayed rooted to where I was. The whole time I stared into those bushes, I myself felt like I was being watched, even though I couldn't see a damn thing in there. Suddenly, my fishing rod jolted in my hand, and I had to avert my gaze back to the lake as I see this huge largemouth bass leap out the water with my hook deep inside its mouth. My anxiety then turns to pure excitement as I slowly reel the beast in and collect him into my hands. I reckon he must have been at least 8 to 10 kilos there. Well above the average, and better yet, a tasty dish for myself. In all my excitement, I completely forgot about the noises that I heard, but figured with all the noise that I made, any animal there would have been scared off, so I paid no more attention to it. After about an hour longer of more fishing, I managed to get 2 more absolute beauties before deciding to call it a day, and haul my load back to the camp. I started a small fire and searched around the campsite for extra firewood. I ended up seasoning my food with some black pepper from home. I'm not an expert about local plant life, or else I would have rooted around for some wild plants for seasoning, but knowing my dumb ass, I would have just ended up poisoning myself. Well, I cooked it all up and ate it right before nightfall. I would very much consider myself a stargazer, so I set up a blanket on the floor and lay there as the sun set until the stars and the moon revealed themselves. Honestly, it's a sight to behold. It makes you forget about all the stress and things that ail you. When I started to find myself nodding off, I decided it was time to head to sleep, so I went inside my tent and made myself comfortable. I remember waking up abruptly in a cold sweat. Honestly, I can't remember what type of dream I was having, but it was enough to wake me up in a start. I rubbed my eyes groggily and looked around my tent. Absolutely nothing. After figuring it was just a really bad dream, I decided just to go back to sleep. But before my head could even reach the pillow, I heard something. Still being half asleep, I wasn't too sure what I was hearing. A coyote? A wolf? I wasn't sure, so I kept listening. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. Someone trying to imitate a wolf. Knowing that just made me more tense. Why the hell was someone doing this in the first place? And why at this godforsaken hour of the night? At that moment, I hear another call to my left, as if somebody was responding to the other call. Then another, and another, and another, until I was completely surrounded in all directions. I started to shake as I reached for my rifle. What the hell were these lunatics doing? Did they know where I was? Were they trying to scare me off? I turned to look at my gun, but just the thought of using it on another person was a completely different scenario than using it against an animal for self-defense. But my whole world came crashing down when I hear the most terrifying thing I've ever heard in my years of life. My body was frozen in pure fear as the howling of these people continued, mixed together with laughter. This ugly symphony wrapped around my tent like a nightmare-fueled orchestra. I scrambled for my phone, only for it to reveal that I had no signal. I was on my own. The only thing I could think to do was to fire a warning shot into the air. Perhaps it would scare them off. So, I carefully unzipped my tent, poked the barrel out, and fired. What followed was silence. What I would usually consider peaceful and tranquil felt like agony, as every second passing by felt like hours. I begged just to hear some sort of running or scampering away, but I didn't even get that. Just dead silence. I tried to collect my breathing and calm myself down, praying that they have just gone away. I chamber another round just in case, and I'm about to put the gun down when I hear a big snap of branches come from right outside my tent. My body is paralyzed with fear. I slowly move towards my flashlight, trying not to make a sound. I needed to know what was there. I had to. I point the flashlight at the wall of the tent and flick the switch, only to be greeted by a darkened silhouette of several people pressed up against the tent with blunt weapons in their hands. In an instant, they start clawing away at the thin material, shrieking like demonically possessed creatures. In an instant, one of the intruders begins to open the entrance to the tent. I see a man in a pagan ritual mask begin to emerge into the tent, only to be sent back by the bullet of my rifle into his shoulder. The group retreated at that moment, hissing as they fled into the cover of the woods. I was out of there in a heartbeat. I grabbed my gun, my phone, my car keys, and I was gone. At that point, I wasn't even thinking about my possessions. I just wanted to be out of there as soon as possible. I drove home as fast as I could, called the police, telling them everything. I rang my wife as well, to let her know what the hell just happened. I made a 2-hour journey turn into 1.5, and I pull into my driveway, barely dressed and shaken to the core. I find my wife outside, worried sick. I collapse into her arms, bawling like a baby. I haven't cried that much since my wedding night. But at that point, I was finally able to calm down. An officer came by to the house to collect some details about what happened, whilst another team, at the same time, was able to go to my campsite. They find it completely ransacked, with the head of a freshly killed deer planted on top of my destroyed tent. The most disturbing part is that, underneath the head, they wrote, "Stay away," in blood. They tried to track their whereabouts, and I even reported the pickup truck I saw before I set up, with those creepy people inside, but to this day they still haven't turned anything up. It's been 3 months since it happened, so it's still relatively fresh in my mind. I know I've tried to keep this relatively light-hearted with some jokes and witty commentary here and there, but let me be absolutely clear. If you're ever out in the wilderness, camping by yourself, the scariest thing out there isn't a wild animal or a poisonous plant. It's people. And I pray to God that whoever is listening to this never has to experience that kind of fear. And that's my story. Be safe out there. And goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with your friends. Also, why not subscribe to my channel? It's free and you'll be up to date with more weekly content. Take care everyone, and have a great day.